It's a big day for India and US ties as US Secretary of State Mike Pompeo has arrived in India, and this is our top focus this hour as this three-day visit is expected to strengthen ties between the oldest and the largest democracies and the changing world order. The US Secretary of State will be meeting Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi at his residence at 10 a.m. IST this morning. And Pompeo will then meet his Indian counterpart S. Jaishankar. The two sides will release press statements at 2 p.m. IST. What you can see on screens are arrival visuals of Secretary Pompeo when he arrived in India last night. Pompeo also made a stopover to Afghanistan where he met the country's President Ashraf Ghani shortly before landing in India. Now, it's a crucial visit given that it follows Mike Pompeo's short but significant stopovers in the Middle East. Pompeo's visit to India only comes ahead of the G20 summit in Osaka. Diplomatic sources have told WION that US-Iran tensions will be high on agenda in Pompeo's talks. Remember, US has refused to extend Iran trade waiver to India. Iran was India's second largest oil supplier last year. Diplomatic sources have also told WION that S. Jaishankar will be speaking with Pompeo about alternatives for India's oil imports. WION has learned that Indian officials have already spoken with their Iranian counterparts about the current situation. New Delhi has asked both Tehran and Washington to refrain from escalating the situation any further. According to sources, S. Jaishankar will also raise the issue of the S-400 missile system with Pompeo. Jaishankar is likely to tell Pompeo that India has a long-standing defense relationship with Russia and that New Delhi went ahead with dealing and keeping in mind the country's security needs. Now, remember, India struck a deal with Russia on the purchase of the S-400 system despite US sanctions on Russia. So basically, by signing the S-400 deal, India has asked it risks triggering the CATSA or the Countering America's Adversaries Through Sanctions Act. US has repeatedly stated that India should look for an alternative. India, however, has made it clear that it has no plans to scrap the S-400 deal. And for more details and to gain some perspective, let's quickly go across to our associate editor Ramesh Ramachandran, who's joining me live from New Delhi. He will be closely tracking Secretary Pompeo's visit to India. And let me quickly go across to Ramesh. Ramesh, let's not forget that Secretary Pompeo's visit is coming amidst an ongoing trade war and, there's an escalating Gulf crisis with Iran. US is hoping to strike that much-needed trade package with India, which it had been negotiating for quite some time. What are the trade issues that we can expect for the two countries to address?
Morning, Akanksha. As you mentioned, trade, technology and terrorism can be expected to figure high on the agenda of the Pompeo-Jaishankar talks to take place here in New Delhi this afternoon. As you mentioned, trade is an outstanding issue. Remember, India sees labor mobility as a trade issue, especially in the context of the H-1B visa issue. Remember, H-1B visa is a non-immigrant visa given to skilled workers from India and other countries so that they can live and work in the U.S. Now, there are moves afoot in the U.S. to review the H-1B visa system, and that is of concern to Indian information technology sector that might affect the interests of the IT companies working in the U.S. So, trade issue is paramount of importance to India. That said, terrorism and technology are the other two issues, especially in the light of the India-US defense and security cooperation. Remember, India wants to acquire latest technology, high defense technology from the US, and India and the US are working as we speak to negotiate a similar agreement. And just to add, Akanksha, Iran and Russia are two key India's partners, which will be the focus of the talk between Pompeo and Jaishankar. Iran, because India has stopped the supply of Iranian oil after the U.S. lifted the exemption on India. And Russia, because India says it has signed an agreement to acquire the S-400 missile defense system from Russia. And the U.S. says, do not buy it because we will impose sanctions on you going forward.
Absolutely. Ramesh, it's interesting that you mentioned that on the agenda will be Iran and Russia, two key partners of India, as you rightly mentioned. Let me come to Iran. Do you think that United States will be able to suggest alternatives when it comes to resolving the oil crisis, considering Iran has been India's second largest oil supplier?
Well, that's exactly what Foreign Minister S. Jaishankar said in Gujarat yesterday, Akanksha, where he told reporters that India will seek to get an explanation or clarification from the U.S. as to how India can go about shoring up its oil requirements going forward, especially in light of the fact that since the 2nd of last month, India has cut down its imports of oil from Iran, especially, as I mentioned before, after the U.S. ended its exemption for India. So India will be looking to solutions from the American side, whether India can shore up the additional supplies of oil going forward. Now, that said, Iran is also important because India has invested a lot of time, energy and capital in the Chabahar port development, and India will seek to get a reassurance from the American side that those development plans will be exempted from the American sanctions going forward as well. So oil, energy security and connectivity, especially in light of the Chabahar port, will be of immense importance to India from the Iranian perspective.
All right, some very interesting points made by you.